Mist hung low over the river, like breath caught between dreams and waking. The water moved lazily, a mirror for the pale sky, broken only by the soft ripples made by fish surfacing for air. On the far bank, reeds whispered and bent, heavy with dew. The land here was neither wild nor tamed, a stretch of wetland that existed quietly, unnoticed, where time moved with the patience of water. Through that mist walked the heron, tall and thin, its long legs sliced through the shallows without a sound. Each step was deliberate, each pause precise. Its feathers, the color of smoke and silver, shimmered faintly in the weak dawn light. A thin breeze ruffled the crest on its head, but the heron did not react. Its yellow eyes were fixed on the water, calculating. Beneath the surface, life stirred, minnows darting, a frog shifting its weight on a submerged stone, the pulse of the river beating slow and steady. The heron waited. Patience was its greatest weapon. For 10 long minutes, it did not move except for the slow rise and fall of its chest. Then, with a motion too fast for the eye to follow, its beak flashed down. A fish struggled for a heartbeat, glinting silver in the light, and then was gone. The heron swallowed, adjusted its stance, and resumed its silent vigil as though nothing had happened. Above, the sky began to change. The mist thinned, and the first rays of sunlight poured over the horizon, staining the water gold. Along the banks, insects woke. Dragonflies hummed, mosquitoes danced, and the steady chorus of frogs began anew. A pair of hippos snorted in the distance, half submerged in a deeper bend of the river. A family of baboons clambered along the far bank, their calls echoing through the still air. The wetlands were waking. The heron stepped forward, deeper now, until the water reached the curve of its belly. Ripples spread out in perfect rings, distorting its reflection. Each ring faded into the next until they vanished, as if the river had absorbed the movement into itself. The heron paused and lifted its head, scanning the horizon. Something was changing in the current. The air carried a faint vibration, a low, distant sound that didn't belong to the natural rhythm of the river. The heron tilted its head. One leg lifted, motionless again. The vibration grew stronger. Then it came. The distant rumble of an engine. Human noise. A small motorboat appeared through the mist, its wake cutting the calm surface apart. The heron froze as the water churned and the fish scattered. The boat passed close, leaving behind a trail of oil and disturbed mud. The bird's eyes followed it until the sound faded into the distance. Only then did it move again, stepping back toward the reeds, where the water was still untouched. The river quieted, but the silence had changed. Where the heron had hunted, the surface was now clouded and brown. The fish would not return soon. The heron stood for a moment longer, then spread its wings, wide, elegant, silent. With two heavy beats, it rose into the damp morning air, flying low above the reeds. Below it, the river glimmered faintly in the light of the rising sun, pretending for a moment that nothing had disturbed it at all. It was the first day of a new season, and the heron would have to learn the river all over again. The heron returned to the river hours later, when the sun had climbed higher and the water shimmered with the soft heat of early day. The mist was gone now, burned away by warmth, revealing the true landscape of the wetland. Reeds as tall as a man, clusters of lily pads, half-submerged logs, and the soft, silent movement of life beneath the surface. The river was still, but it was not quiet. Beneath its calm skin, the water held 100 stories at once. The hunt of a turtle weaving through weed beds, the slow drift of catfish through silted channels, the sudden panic of a frog, sensing a shadow overhead. Every drop carried memory of floods and droughts, of footprints pressed into the mud, of migration and return. The heron had learned to listen, not with ears, but with stillness. And today, the stillness told a different story. The fish had moved. The morning's disturbance from the motorboat had not only driven them away from the shore, but deeper into the cool channels where currents still flowed. There, they found safety, away from both predators and sunlight. But hunger does not wait, and the heron, lean and alert, knew it had to adapt. It took flight again, gliding low over the water, wings broad and steady. It circled once, then landed in a new stretch of river, narrower, shaded by overhanging fig trees. The water here ran deeper, darker. A small stream fed into it from the north, carrying leaves, insects, and silt, a banquet trail. Where the stream met the river, the heron settled again, lowering one leg into the soft mud. This time it did not hunt immediately. It waited. 10 minutes, 15. A faint ripple stirred near the base of a rock, then another. The heron shifted its weight forward. Its neck stretched slightly. Again it waited. Then, like lightning, its beak struck. This time the prey was large, a mudfish nearly the length of the heron's own neck. It thrashed wildly, scattering drops of water into the air. The heron lifted it high, beating it once against the riverbank to stop the movement. Then, slowly, with effort, it swallowed. The bulge traveled visibly down its throat, and afterward, it stood very still, recovering, balanced, victorious. Across the river, eyes watched. A crocodile, almost invisible against the muddy shallows, lay with only its nostrils above water. It had seen the hunt, and now observed the heron with ancient patience. But the bird did not wade any deeper. It knew where the shadows lay thickest and what they held. The heron turned, lifting its wings again and taking off. Its reflection skimmed the surface like a ghost. The crocodile did not follow. There would be other chances. By late afternoon, the river had returned to its rhythm. The heron returned to its nest, a sparse platform of sticks high in a tree near the bend. From this vantage point, it could watch the river unwind in curves and channels. A few dragonflies zipped past its beak. The air was warm, still. Somewhere nearby, a fish eagle called. Below, the water shimmered with hidden movement. There was no true silence here, only waiting. The heron, the fish, the crocodile, each one listening for the next shift in the pattern, each one remembering that even in stillness, the river speaks. And beneath it all, the echo of the morning's disturbance remained. A change in current, a slight shift in habit. The heron had survived the interruption. But the river had changed, and so must everything that lived inside it. The wetland had bloomed overnight. Where yesterday there were only wide patches of open water, now clusters of lily pads spread like green constellations across the river's surface. Their round leaves floated with quiet authority, casting deep circles of shade beneath them. And in that shade, something moved. The heron knew the pattern. Insects clung to the tops of the pads, and frogs nestled beneath. Small fish, cichlids, baby tilapia, drifted in the cool darkness where the sun could not reach. But so too did something else. A shape, slow and deliberate, a predator in silence. From his perch in the shallows, the heron stood like a statue. The morning sun burned through a haze of rising mist, warming his feathers, but he did not shift. His gaze was fixed not on the open river, but on the lily field itself. Something was wrong. There were no dragonflies, no frogs calling. Even the birds that usually skittered along the pads were gone. A ripple broke the surface. A small, concentric wave spread outward, from the center of the lilies. Another followed, but they were not from fish. They were too wide, too slow. Then, a flicker of movement. A long, dark shape, sinuous, muscular, coiled beneath the pads and vanished again. A rock python. It had come with the rains. Drawn by the fish and frogs and eggs, the snake had slid into the river at night, coiling through the reeds and resting in the roots. It hunted by stealth, striking up from below, silent, deadly. It did not swim with the urgency of crocodiles. It didn't need to. It waited. The heron stepped back. Just once. A single shift of weight. He would not fish here. He knew better than to test a current that didn't speak. He turned from the water, walking up the muddy bank with deliberate calm, eyes still watching the lily pads. From the far side of the lilies came a splash. Quick, soft. A reed frog, no larger than a child's thumb, had ventured too close to the edge. It disappeared in an instant. The pads shifted once, then fell still again. The river resumed its performance of peace. A few meters upriver, the heron found another patch of water, clearer, more shallow, free of cover. He hunted briefly, catching two finger-length fish and a pale insect that skittered across the surface. But his posture remained tense. The wetlands were changing, not just in water levels or temperature, but in behavior. Predators were returning. Not all were loud. As the day warmed, the heron flew back to a higher perch, a low, leaning tree whose branches extended far out over the river. From there, he watched the lilies below, the place where silence had meaning. He saw nothing, but he felt the weight of the hidden. In the afternoon heat, the python surfaced once, only its nostrils and part of its thick, mottled body visible between the pads. It floated there for nearly 5 minutes before sliding silently beneath again. No sound, no splash. The river held its breath. That evening, as frogs began to sing and mosquitoes danced above the surface, the heron did not return to the shallows. Instead, he roosted high in the canopy, wrapped in quiet. The lily pads still floated. The current still moved. But the heron knew. Beneath them, something had claimed that part of the river. And now, even the water seemed to hesitate before flowing through it. At the curve of the river, where the reeds bowed low and the current slowed to a hush, the crocodile waited. It had not moved in hours. Its massive body lay half submerged in the mud, only its nostrils, eyes, and the ridged line of its back above the surface. To most creatures, it was just another drift of bark, another shape sculpted by water. But beneath the skin of stillness, a predator watched, ancient, focused, and completely unhurried. The heron arrived late in the morning. The sky was clear, and the wetland hummed with life. Insects swarmed over sunlit patches of water, frogs called from the reeds, and the hum of dragonflies trembled like wires strung between branches. Fish darted through the channels, their bodies casting thin shadows over the pale mud. The heron landed on a sun-warmed log and stood perfectly still. One leg tucked close, neck curved into a thoughtful S shape. Its shadow rippled faintly across the water, brushing close, too close, to the crocodile's eye. But the reptile did not move. It was not time. The crocodile had hunted the day before, a tilapia pulled from a deeper pocket, and now it waited again. Hunger did not rule it. Patience did. Its body could go a week, even 2, without food. It was not the stomach that dictated movement, but opportunity. The heron stepped off the log and into the shallows, feet sliding through soft silt. It moved slowly, its eyes scanning the bottom, the same way it had done 1,000 times before. But this place, this curve in the river, was different now. The crocodile had claimed it. The heron stabbed at a fish, missed, and tried again. A flash of movement in the weeds drew its attention. It leaned forward, neck tensed, and stopped. The water ahead was wrong. Still. Too still. The fish had vanished. The frogs were quiet. The ripples moved against the wind. Something was there. The heron backed away step by step. It turned without sound and leapt into the air, beating its wings hard once, twice, before lifting into the sky. Only then, when the bird's shadow no longer fell over the water, did the crocodile blink. The moment passed. Further down the river, a family of warthogs came to drink. A mother and 3 piglets. Their hooves sunk into the soft bank as they snorted and nudged the muddy water. The crocodile moved, not with a splash, but a ripple, a smooth glide, almost invisible. It closed the distance in silence. The strike came with terrifying precision. Water exploded upward. One piglet screamed briefly before the river closed again. The surface stilled. The reeds rustled once and went still. From the air, the heron saw none of this, only the sudden scatter of birds, the wide splash, then the return to stillness. It circled once and did not return to that bend. That night, as the light faded and the frogs sang louder, the crocodile rested again in the shallows, motionless, timeless. The water moved around it like silk. It had fed. It could wait. And so the river held another secret beneath its surface, one that would not stir again for days or even weeks, but it would be there, watching, always watching. The river had grown quiet again, but it was not the stillness of peace. It was the silence that follows change. Birds no longer flew low over certain banks. Frogs had fallen silent in patches of reed. Even the heron, usually master of these shallow waters, had shifted its patterns, flying farther, rising earlier, returning later. The reason for this was not a python nor a crocodile. It came on two legs, in rubber sandals, with calloused hands and an old canoe that scraped softly against the riverbank each morning. A fisherman. He arrived before sunrise, always alone, paddling silently through the mist. His nets were hand-woven, stretched tight between sticks and stones, cast into the channels where the water flowed deepest. They were not cruel. They were simple, tools of survival. But the river had no understanding of intent. To the heron, they were obstacles. The usual routes were blocked. The fish moved differently. Where once minnows had gathered in droves, now they were scattered, trapped, tangled, or absent. The heron had adapted before, but this disruption was deeper, more constant. It changed the rhythm of the water. On the fourth morning, the heron landed near one of the net sites. From the edge of the reeds, it watched the canoe drift by. The fisherman stood barefoot, carefully lifting a line from the water. His movements were slow, practiced. From the net, he pulled a catfish, still alive, its gills fluttering. A second tug brought up a tangled mess of weed and an unlucky crab. He worked without speaking, placing each catch in a shallow wooden box beside him. The heron observed everything. As the canoe moved downstream, the bird waded forward and stood near the edge of a net line. Small fish twitched in its mesh. One was trapped half in, half out, too small for the fisherman to keep, too stuck to escape. The heron lowered its head, and with one quick motion, plucked it free. A meal, stolen from a trap. It would not be the last. Over the next days, the heron learned the pattern. Where the nets were set, when they were emptied, where small fish escaped, wounded and disoriented, the bird became a quiet scavenger, taking what the nets missed or released. Others did too. Otters at night, turtles during the midday heat, even kingfishers skimming low to pick off what floated near the surface. But not everything escaped. One morning, the heron found something else in the shallows, the still body of a young egret, tangled in nylon mesh. It had dived too low, misjudged the water, and drowned silently. The heron stepped around the corpse without a sound, its eyes dull. Life and death were not abstract here. They were part of the current. Later that day, the fisherman returned. He saw the bird, frowned, and removed it from the net. He did not leave it behind. He laid it gently in the reeds and muttered something under his breath. A soft word in a language the heron did not understand. By sunset, the nets were gone, for now. The fisherman would return, but he had moved farther downstream. The river here was clear again. Fish began to return to the old channels. Frogs resumed their call. The heron stood once more in familiar shallows, staring at the surface. Its reflection stared back, rippling slightly with each breath of wind. Beneath, the fish moved differently now, cautious, quick. The river had changed, and so had its inhabitants. Even stillness had learned to shift. And the heron, silent as ever, hunted on. The change came slowly, then all at once. At first, it was only the sounds, or the absence of it. The frogs stopped calling in the afternoons. The rustle of reeds in the wind gave way to brittle creaks. The thick chorus of insects thinned. The air grew heavier each day, thick with heat and silence. The heron noticed it before most. The river was shrinking. What had been a wide channel only weeks ago was now a series of disconnected pools. The current slowed, then stalled. Algae bloomed in still water, coating the surface in a murky green film. Small fish gasped at the edges, their gills flaring as oxygen dwindled. The heron, wings folded tight, watched from the bank as the river began to break apart. This was the beginning of the dry season. The fishermen stopped coming. There was no point now. The nets would have only caught mud and dead leaves. Even the crocodile, the silent sovereign of the deep pools, had vanished, moved upstream, or buried itself in the cool shade beneath the clay banks to wait out the heat. Only the birds remained, and fewer of them each day. The heron flew farther now, gliding low over empty stretches of cracked earth, searching for pockets of water where fish still gathered. It found one, a small spring-fed pool nestled under the roots of a fig tree. The water was clear and cool, sheltered from the direct sun. A few dozen fish lingered, trapped by shrinking options. For the heron, it was salvation. It hunted daily there, precise and efficient. Other birds came too, ibises, egrets, even a hungry stork. But none stayed long. There was tension in the air, not just from thirst, but from the inevitability of loss. The pool would not last. One morning, the heron returned to find the pool had dropped several inches overnight. The spring feeding it was slowing, choked with fallen leaves and debris. The fish had clustered tightly into the deepest part, their movements sluggish. The water smelled different now, not clean but stale, sour. The heron struck, catching one of the last catfish. It swallowed quickly, but there was no satisfaction, only urgency. Above, vultures circled, not over a carcass, but over the promise of one. Everything here was nearing the edge: water, prey, even time. By the seventh day, the pool was little more than mud and shadow. The heron stood at its edge, feathers ruffled in the heat, its breath shallow. It did not hunt. There was nothing left to catch. A pair of baboons wandered down to drink. One slipped in the mud, screeched, and leapt back. The noise echoed strangely, as though the land itself had grown hollow. The heron didn't flinch. It simply turned its head toward the sky. Clouds, faint, pale ghosts, had appeared on the far horizon, but they brought no promise. Not yet. That night, the heron returned to its roost, higher than usual, near the crown of a wind-bent acacia. From there it could see the full stretch of the dying river, now a scatter of puddles and bone-dry channels. The wetlands had vanished. What remained was a memory. And yet the heron stood. It had seen this before. Season after season, year after year. The water always left, and it always returned. The fish would come again. The river would remember how to flow. But for now, it was the bird's turn to wait, to endure. It began not with thunder, but with silence. Not the dry silence of heat and dust, but a different kind. A silence filled with pressure, like the world holding its breath. The air grew still. The insects stopped buzzing. Even the wind forgot to move. The heron stood alone on the cracked bank of the vanished river. Below its feet, the earth had split into pale plates, dry as bone. The pool beneath the fig tree had vanished days ago, leaving behind only dark silt and a scatter of fish bones. For 2 nights, the heron had not hunted. There was nothing left to eat and nowhere left to go. And then, the wind returned. It came from the south, slow and heavy, carrying a scent so faint it was barely there. Wet leaves, distant soil, lightning in the sky. The heron lifted its head. Its eyes narrowed. It knew this feeling. Above, the sky was shifting, not just clouding, building. A wall of steel-gray clouds rose from the edge of the world, towering and deep. The first flash of lightning came silently. Then, seconds later, a low rumble rolled across the plains, long and patient. Thunder not in anger, but in promise. The heron did not flee. It stepped into the open, wings half extended, and waited. Then, rain. Not a drizzle, not a mist, a torrent. The sky cracked open and spilled its weight on the land in great sheets, turning dust to mud in minutes. Dry gullies became rushing channels. Leaves, long curled in thirst, unfolded to meet the downpour. Frogs erupted in chorus, from nowhere and everywhere, as if they had simply risen out of the earth itself. The heron stood soaked, unmoving, as water poured from its feathers in rivulets. Its chest rose and fell. It blinked slowly, and then it moved. It flew low over the renewing land, following the sound of running water. What had been a dead streambed only a day ago now shimmered with flow. Small fish, no one knew from where, already wriggled in the murky currents. Life had returned with astonishing speed. Seeds bloomed, insects hatched, the air buzzed again, the land remembered how to breathe. The heron landed near a bend in the river, where the water had pooled and settled. The surface was already alive with movement. Minnows, dragonflies, frogs clinging to wet grass blades. The bird stepped forward and struck, once, then again. A clean catch. It swallowed, and its feathers ruffled in satisfaction. Nearby, a crocodile's eye broke the surface. Not hunting, not yet, only watching. A kingfisher chattered from an overhanging branch. The reeds swayed again, no longer brittle, but supple. The river was awake. Above them all, the rain still fell, steady and warm. That evening, the heron returned to its old roost, high above the river that had once stilled beneath its feet. From there, it saw the floodplain stretching out, filling, breathing. The water had returned, not as it was, but as it needed to be. Changed and alive. The river had learned to move again. And as the heron watched the light shift across the soaked horizon, a breeze stirred the wet feathers along its back. A wind that remembered where to blow.